episode 93. I'm Nick Dixon here with Free Speech Kiwi Toby Young, and coming up, Farage in trouble over his Putin comments, though Reform continued to surge in the polls, and Sunak and Starmer both do mental stuff, plus Peak Woke, and the full extended podcast on basedmedia.org as ever. Toby, you're in New Zealand. I haven't spoken to you much. What's been going on?
Yeah, I'm here on a speaking tour organised by the Free Speech Union of New Zealand, and I'm going to Australia on Thursday, and I'm going on a speaking tour of Australia organised by the Free Speech Union of Australia. So yeah, it's been good. I've been meeting lots of movers and shakers out here. Had lunch today with the Deputy Prime Minister and his team, and then dinner with the Shadow Attorney General, and did quite a big event yesterday. Got quite a good turnout, about 120 people. Lots of questions. So it's nice. It's a small country, so it doesn't take long to kind of meet everybody. I don't mean all 5.25 million people, but meet the kind of the politicians and media owners and newspaper columnists and podcasters and so forth. So yeah, it's been good.
I don't want to be a dick about it, but are there really any movers and shakers in New Zealand? I mean,
they have a lot of earthquakes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And you've got Lord of the Rings. And do you meet Jacinda Ardern? Is she still about?
No,
I hear she likes you.
Yeah, I don't think she's a big fan, but no, I think she's moved. I think she's living in. She moved to America. I think she's working for the UN now, isn't she, or something like that? No, she's at Harvard. She's at the Kennedy School at Harvard.
Oh wow!
So
I thought she'd probably move to
Massachusetts.
the core of the universe or something, just to live in a sort of boiling inferno that would suit her. Sorry, that was went in quite hard there, suggesting she's some kind of demonic figure that can survive in kind of volcano scenarios. So that's New Zealand. All right. Well, I'm glad it's going well. It does mean when we are remote again. I was going to say apologies, but some people probably prefer it because some people like the sound or whatever. And I'm absolutely knackered, which is why I'm not making sense. We do the podcast earlier because Toby's in New Zealand. I'm not an early person, not that early, but early for me. And I just didn't sleep all night because of this alleged heat wave in England. It's already started. I just couldn't sleep. My room was so hot, even though the heat wave hasn't really started. It's meant to get to 27 later today. And I was too hot, and I'd eaten too much, and I just sat there sitting upright till 7:30 a.m. and then got like a tiny bit of sleep. So that's just flagging that straight away. Because people love to hear about my health. And I also did a food intolerance test. Turns out I'm intolerant to egg whites, which is not surprising because I've not eaten eggs for years because I knew they were dodgy. Cow's milk, yeast, and something, and I was borderline with wheat. So there you go. So it might explain why I can't eat anything, and every day is a kind of nightmare for me. Egg white, I was 91. Again, that's almost like the top. Like it only goes to 100, I think. So I was like, it's like don't eat, and it's in quite a lot of things. If you look at the ingredients, it's in all like cakes and ice cream, isn't it?
So have you adjusted your diet accordingly, and are you now feeling better?
Yeah, I've just been eating tons of egg whites. So I'm like, fuck the system. No, well, I'd already was not eating eggs anyway, really, and I've still been eating bread, which obviously has yeast, so I shouldn't be. I haven't quite adjusted yet, but I'd already made some big adjustments. And listeners might know I got rid of Coke Zero, Diet Coke, all Coke, which has been hellish. But I'm sort of all right now. The problem is you have to sleep. You can't get any sort of artificial boost. And I had given up chocolate, but then I've rebounded hard on that because I'm not a Superman. And I've been doing extra. I've ran the last 2 days. I've been doing extra running, trying to get fit for football because we got spanked at football last week, and we had a weak team. Then I got the ball smashed in my face from off the field. Someone wasn't even on the pitch. They smashed the ball in my face. I do wonder if it's worth it. Sorry, these are digressions. I just say them for the people that complain about me talking about my health. But that's not really a health complaint. That's more of an fascinating update. For more fascinating updates, you can go to nickdixon.net and get my full episodes of The Current Thing. I've just got one out today as we record with Oren McIntyre. So go to nickdixon.net, £5 a month to get all my extra content and my articles. And buymeacoffee.com/nickdixon. Toby, you want to quickly plug some other podcast that's a rival?
Yeah. We've launched the Skeptic, not to be confused with the Weekly Sceptic.
Who could ever do that?
Daily Skeptic. We're into our third episode, about to drop the fourth episode on Thursday, and it's going well. Yeah, it's like we interview contributors to the Daily Skeptic, sort of like 10-15 minute interviews with this our new associate editor Laurie Wastel, who's very good. So yeah, that's working out really well, and that has a premium bit on it. And for, if you donate £5 a month or more, you get access not only to the premium section of the Skeptic, but also some paywalled content now we've introduced onto the site, and you can also join in our Discord server and chat about articles with the authors of the articles. So yeah, we're trying to beef up the Daily Skeptic, and because we can't ever get any advertising because we've been blacklisted by various sites like NewsGuard, so we're having to think of ways to make it generate a bit more revenue so we can keep it going.
All right, we'll go to that if you want. Sat's Weekly Sceptic. And now let's get on with the main Toby's furious. I couldn't tell if he was furious or it was just a delay in New Zealand. I think it's both. Let's crack on with the main stories. So, Toby, you may have missed this over in NZ, but the big story here has been this Farage. Here's a headline on the Mail. Farage, the West provoked Putin. And in these so-called panorama interviews with Nick Robinson, Farage made a sort of fairly standard claim that although it was Putin's fault for invading, we expanded eastwards and we provoked it in that sense. And he predicted this 10 years ago. I always said this would happen, blah, blah. And again, as I often am with manufactured scandals, I am nonplussed by it. I think it's completely reasonable. And Hitchens today has been online having a go at Boris because saying it's completely normal and citing all these experts that say it. But this was the full-on Matrix attack against Farage. All the media took this as an opportunity. Shows they're taking him very seriously now that they've all bothered to get together and say, "Oh, he's evil. He's working for Putin." I guess it's the Trump playbook that's already worked, minus the kind of Russian bots. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, I disagree with him on this issue. It sounds like, I mean, even though he's saying, I'm not excusing what Putin did, and what he did, what he's doing is indefensible. Nevertheless, it sounds like, because he's sort of repeating a kind of Kremlin talking point, it sounds like he's making an excuse for Putin. He's saying it was partly our fault, or partly the fault of the West, because of the eastward expansion of NATO and the EU. That was poking the Russian bear. I mean, I think it's a, of course one can make that argument. I don't think it's a particularly strong argument, and I think the risk of making that argument is you sound like you are making excuses for Putin. But I think what's sort of perplexing about it is, why bring this up? He's doing really well. He's really the only person in this general election campaign who's doing well. And why suddenly open up a kind of new war on this front? It's inevitable that it's going to provoke an attack. We know that attacking the Western position on the war in Ukraine is a kind of a lightning rod, and is going to trigger a matrix attack, just as if you say that the pandemic was planned, or the vaccines don't work, or they're dangerous, or climate change isn't real. It's one of these hot button issues which brings a kind of coordinated attack. So why did he bring it up? And it doesn't seem to be an issue, I don't think, that's going to play particularly well with the people he's appealing to. Who does reform appeal to? Well, for the most part, white, middle-aged British men, not exclusively, but that's their kind of core vote. And for men of a certain age, they think of Russia as the enemy because they remember the Cold War. I don't think they're particularly on his side on this issue. And, being accused of being a Putin shill, being accused of taking Kremlin gold. I mean, probably not true. People speculated about whether he was paid by Russia Today. I think he's denied that he was paid by Russia Today. But that's a can of worms. It wasn't particularly sensible for him to reopen. It just seems like bad politics, and seems to speak of his inexperience, his amateurishness. I mean, maybe it would have been difficult not to kind of talk about it when Nick Robinson brought it up, and he didn't want to shy away from it. And one of the things which makes him such an attractive candidate, more attractive than the others, is that he's kind of more forthright, less kind of premeditated, says what he thinks. But this does look to me like a silly, unforced error.
Hmm. Well, a few things. I mean, one, when I looked for the interview, everyone was talking about the interview as if it was contemporary, and then I looked and it seemed to be from the 11th of June. So I was a bit surprised that it sort of popped up and the media was sort of leaping on it. It seemed to be one of those things where it was already out and no one cared that much, but then clips resurfaced. That's the phrase now, and it's when they want to just make a storm out of it. So to me, it's a matrix attack, as Tate would say. It's a mainstream media. It's the Tories. It's the system attacking for us, and they just look for anything. And this comment was fairly innocuous at the time. I could be wrong on that because why did it suddenly pop up? But I believe it was already out, and it just didn't do anything. But then suddenly it was a big deal. So I never trust that. But also, to me, it's just the classic Farage just speaking his mind and sticking. Although people say it'll alienate some of his voting base, people also like the fact that he's transparent, speaks his mind, sticks with what he believes. You know, when it famously with Brexit and with a number of other topics, and so he doesn't flip flop. So he's always said this. So why not continue to say it? So that is actually good for him. I understand if you're very sort of big on the Ukraine issue and you're on the pro UK. I mean, a lot of people are pro Ukraine, but if you're very passionate about it, obviously it will alienate you. But I also think it won't alienate a lot of his people. And of course, Tories have been attacking him, Tugendhat, people like that. Boris Johnson, this is nauseating ahistorical drivel and more Kremlin propaganda. Nobody provoked Putin. Nobody poked the bear with a stick. The people of Ukraine voted overwhelmingly in 1991 to be a sovereign and independent country. They were perfectly entitled to seek both NATO and EU membership. See, I think that's a fairly extreme position, the idea that you want them in NATO and the EU. I personally think that's more extreme. But Peter Hitchens replies to Boris and says, "Oh, Alexander, the leading American Russia hawk, Robert Kagan, no friend of Putin, has said in Foreign Affairs that Russia was provoked." And he goes on and does a couple more along those lines. NATO itself was pretty divided on Ukraine, NATO membership at its famous 2008 Bucharest summit and other stuff like that. So yeah, he didn't agree either. So I don't think it was that extreme. And Farage himself replied to Boris on X and said, "Boris, you're a liar and a hypocrite. I'm glad you are no longer prime minister of this country." And he shared an I front page with Boris blames EU for war in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And then, Boris he likes a flip flop. Boris Johnson blamed EU for Russia's 2014 attacks on Ukraine and was branded Putin apologist. So Boris has been a Putin apologist in a very, very similar way in the past. That's why I think it's kind of all bollocks. It's all current thing nonsense. It's like, well, you can't criticize this now. We can't just have a rational discussion. This is the new issue where we have to be, all in lockstep. And maybe that's the case if it's a war on if it was World War II, I could understand that. But people don't really feel quite the same about this war. They feel it is open to question. It's not quite on our doorstep, although it kind of is getting there. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, amongst people, on our side of the culture war, um, there is a kind of schism about the war in Ukraine, with some people taking Ukraine's side, and some people, thinking that it's a manufactured conflict designed to distract us from what's really happening, and they're very resistant to feeling any kind of pressure to take the Ukrainian side, and they detect the same forces at work as were at work during the pandemic and so forth. Um, I've always been sort of skeptical of the skeptical attitude towards the war in Ukraine. I mean, the argument that it's extreme to say the Ukrainians should be allowed to join both NATO and the EU. It's like, well, they are a sovereign people. If that's what they want to do, why shouldn't they be allowed to do it? I think one of the surprising things to me about Farage's position on this is that, can't he see the parallels between the UK wanting to be independent of the EU and wanting to reassert its right to national self determination and to recover its sovereignty, but not extend exactly the same sympathy to the Ukrainian people, who also are menaced by an evil European superstate, and just want to recover their sovereignty. Why not recognize their right to national self-determination, just as he championed our right to national self-determination? It seems a little bit inconsistent, and you would have thought that he would understand that argument and not think, well, because they're sort of within the strategic orbit of Russia, and because there are these historical links, we really shouldn't intrude, and the Ukrainian people shouldn't ask for too much independence, because that will inevitably provoke this kind of overbearing emperor on their doorstep. I mean, it's like, surely they, like all countries, have a right to self-determination and to national sovereignty.
All that said, I mean, and Zelensky's also said he's been infected by the virus of Putinism. But do you also accept it to kind of, it's the media, it's the established political parties suddenly realizing, oh, we can have a big pop at Farage now. And the fact that they're suddenly all doing it means they're taking him more seriously, whereas before they were just kind of, oh, ignore, this is between Labour and Tories. Are they running scared?
Well, I think the Tories certainly have kind of seen this as an opportunity to bash Farage, because they're concerned about hemorrhaging votes to reform. Um, have Labour attacked Farage with the same ferocity over his position on this? I mean, it seems like Labour sort of are perfectly happy. When your friends are fighting, just let them carry on fighting. Oh, sorry, when your enemies are falling out, just don't intervene. They seem happy for, and you'll note that during the debates, the kind of B-list debates, Angela Rayner doesn't attack Nigel Farage. She just, because she doesn't want to undermine, Labour doesn't want to undermine support for reform, because it's good for them, because it divides the opposition vote.
Starmer did call it disgraceful.
Did he? Okay. It's funny, isn't it, that this is the first issue that Boris has really kind of intervened on in the election. It's like the only thing that's moved him to kind of to become a protagonist in this drama is this issue, nothing else. It's a bit odd.
It's his big topic, isn't it? He's obsessed with Ukraine. I mean, there was that rumor that he scuppered peace talks. He's taking this massive jingoistic stance. Perhaps wants some sort of job in NATO, or whatever it is, or whatever UN or whatever, some sort of diplomatic job related to it somehow. I don't really follow all that stuff, but it seems to be his big issue. It must be tied to what he wants to do. That's my guess, anyway. All right, we've done a bit on Farage there, and as we record, he's doing a speech that he's calling the most important speech of his campaign. So I wonder what he's saying there. Probably a lot of similar stuff. And I just said what a lot of people said. Completely reasonable. Anyway, probably just we all the same kind of thing. Like, what about Boris Johnson? What did he say? And then it'll just, yeah, I can kind of guess what it'll be about. Maybe there's some new announcement. He just announced he'd had a grandchild, which is nice. All right, well, let's look at the more positive Farage news, which is it doesn't seem to be impacting these polls. So, I mean, some of this happened before, chronologically, the Putin thing, but there was this, so many polls. There's Tory wipeout on the front of the Telegraph a few days ago. And this was a shocking poll that gave just 53 MPs to the Tories. And in this poll, everyone is basically gone. Kemi survives and Tugendhat. And Kemi arguably becomes leader, according to Gordon Rayner. Kemi's the future of the party, basically because no one else survives in this version. Yeah, your precious Kemi. So it's cleverly, in this version, Rishi and Hunt would both go. And so would cleverly Suella, Penny, Mogg, Jenrick, Paul Lester, who we like, Priti Patel, Elwood, Gillian Keegan. And we like some of these people, but they unfortunately, this Telegraph poll has them going.
Yes, though it did have Reform winning no seats, I noticed. It seemed some of these polls seem a bit too pessimistic, I think. I mean, I know the methodology with these kind of these big polls is pretty good, but yeah, I don't think it's sort of wildly optimistic to think that the Tories will win more than 53 seats. I'd be amazed if they actually get fewer than 100 seats. And I also think that there was another poll showing that uh, uh, Farage is going to be the beneficiary of the biggest swing in history, and is currently on 42% in Clacton. And I guess that's the swing from 2019, because before that, UKIP obviously won that seat when Douglas Carswell resigned as a Conservative and stood again for UKIP and then won it again in 2017. Yeah, I think odds on Farage will win that seat, and Reform will probably win a couple of other seats too. But I'd be amazed if they win more than 2 or 3, and I'd also be surprised if the Tories go down to below 100.
Well, it depends, doesn't it? Which one you look at. So Matt Goodwin has this bombshell poll. Everyone's got a bombshell poll. This one gives Labour 35%, Reform 24%, Conservatives 15%. So this one's massive. Lib Dems 12%, and Greens 8%, and SNP 3%. So this one is massive for Reform, and people say, "Oh, it's just Goodwin," but of course he polls in an objective fashion. I'm sure he doesn't do rigged polls,
Yeah,
but go on.
that result that hasn't been replicated by any of the other polls. I mean, Nigel Farage keeps talking about the crossover point having been reached, and obviously what he's hoping is that if Reform do clearly in all the polls overtake the Conservatives, then lots of people who were planning to vote Conservative will think that the Conservatives just have absolutely no chance and will switch to Reform, and that Reform will begin to gather momentum in the sort of final week of the campaign and might actually do surprisingly well. But it feels like that's not happening. This Matthew Goodwin result hasn't been replicated. In most of the polls, Reform are just a little bit behind the Conservatives. I don't think we've seen yet any polls since Farage has gotten into a bit of difficulty by taking the line he has on Ukraine, but I don't think that's going to boost support. It may not do much to damage it. You may be right about that, but I don't think it's going to do much to boost it. So it feels like things aren't going to change dramatically in the kind of final days of the campaign, and we're not going to see a massive surge for Reform. They're not going to leave the Tories behind, from Labour's point of view, it's the best possible result.
I did just want to also mention this one from Whitestone Insight, though. They had Reform on 20%, Tories on 19%. Yeah, less extreme than the Goodwin one. In this one, Reform wins 6 seats, and the Tories get 67, Lib Dems 61. Tories remain the opposition in this one, but still get spanked with a 288 seat majority for Labour. So, yeah, they're all sort of similar. Labour winning by massively, Tories getting destroyed, Reform getting between 0 and 6, depending. I don't know. I think they could get more. The great thing about this moment is you can just post anything about Farage and it gets like massive likes on X. I just posted Farage is inevitable the other day. That got like 2K. I know people love it when I talk about my tweets. And then I put up one yesterday. I just said, took a day off social media, which I did. What did I say? I said, just took a day off social media. But I see they've gone full Matrix attack on Farage. It won't work. They cannot stop what's coming. 3.6 thousand. So any tweets like that just will do really well about Farage. There was one where I said he's going to be not just prime minister, but king, and no one can stop it. And I just can't help myself. But it is fun. I mean, it is fun. But yeah, the question is, will it convert into seats? I think it will. But it is absurd, our system, isn't it, that Farage could end up with a larger percentage than the Tories and get something like 6 seats compared to 67.
Yes. Well, one of the things that might be a consequence of the enormous majority that Labour looks on track to win, and other anomalies like the one you've just mentioned, is that it could produce much more public support for proportional representation. If it looks like, because we have our first past the post system, Reform are going to be penalised, the Tories are going to be penalised, and Labour is going to be a huge beneficiary. There's not going to be an adequate opposition, at least for the next 5 years. And I think that you can see some Tories thinking, crikey, if this can happen, we could poll 23-24% of the vote and end up with only about 100 seats. Maybe they'll come around to proportional representation too. I mean, I think Nigel Farage is already in favour of it. The Lib Dems are already in favour of it. Of course, the difficulty is that there'll be no incentive for Labour to support PR because they'll have benefited enormously from the first past the post system. But I can see a kind of groundswell of kind of public support for PR emerging as a consequence of what looks likely to be a highly unusual election result, in which the results are skewed massively in both directions by the first past the post system.
Yes, there'll be no reason for Labour to listen to anything. I mean, they'll just be this elected but unaccountable quangocracy, won't they? As outlined in the New Britain document that Gordon Brown's kindly written for us. So they'll be following that, changing the House of Lords. They'll probably get rid of elections. They'll probably get rid of anything. They will never be able to be toppled. I mean, I'm talking about Farage as king, but really Starmer will be behaving more like a king, is my guess. Yeah. So yeah, maybe it will pressure people to switch to PR. What about Kemi? You love Kemi. Is she going to end up leader by default, or is it going to be Cameron or something weird?
Yeah, I think it. I mean, I think Kemi must be the favourite, not least because so many of her rivals are likely to lose their seats. I mean, it might the prospect of leading, a party which is going to be so neutered, and will, it'll be kind of a thankless task leading a parliamentary Conservative Party of, not much more than 100 strong. They won't be able to do much. They won't be able to do much in the way of opposing the government. I mean, it'll be pretty unappealing prospect. And I guess if Starmer does win, a 250 plus seat majority, then the chances of defeating him in 29 are pretty remote. At which point, whoever the leader of the opposition has been will have to then fall on their sword, give someone else a go. So, it might not. Maybe Kemi will think, "Crikey, this is such an unappealing prospect. Maybe I won't throw my hat into the ring." But I think she probably will, and I think she looks likely to be Rishi's successor at this point.
All right, maybe we'll move on from the polls, as fun as they are, and do our other story, which is sort of a general story about some of the Tory madness, the Rishi campaign madness, really, Starmer campaign madness, and also the question time, which I don't know if you watched, but the quite boring leaders question time. Did you not watch it? I guess you're over in New Zealand, so it's quite happy. I can tell you what happened.
Really
not much. It was pretty absurd. I mean, Rishi. Maybe should we get into that? Well, basically, Rishi was. It was Rishi, Starmer, and Ed Davey and John Swinney, who no one cares about. I was thinking, like, why do we have to watch it? It was like watching, when you're in Scotland, you have to watch. You ever go to Scotland? I used to go as a kid to Scotland, and you'd have to watch like the Scottish version of Match of the Day or whatever. I'm like, why am I looking at Kilmarnock and Dundee United? All this rubbish. And you're like, oh, I'm trapped in Scotland, so I can't watch normal football. So it's kind of similar. It's like, why do I have to look at John? I'm in London. Is my antenna malfunctioning? Obviously, I don't watch I don't pay for the BBC, but I was watching it through a shop window. But I'm like, why do I have to see John Swinney when I'm in London? It doesn't make any sense, so it's madness, really, and especially because Farage wasn't in it.
Yeah, why wasn't Farage in it? Why John Swinney and not Farage?
Well, exactly. It's a stitch-up, isn't it? The whole thing's ludicrous. He was saying he was demanding to be in it. Yeah, and if it's going to be just Sunak and Starmer, I think there's an argument where you can say, yeah, we don't recognise Farage yet. Mm-hmm. But Sunak, Starmer, Ed Davey, you're already scraping the barrel a little bit, and then John Swinney, he's been in there 10 seconds. I mean, yeah, Farage has only just become officially leader, fine, but no one cares about Swinney, and no one can vote for him in most of the country. I mean, what is it all about? Who cares about Swinney? So the SNP are going to get destroyed anyway. So that was a complete joke and totally boring. And Ed Davey, he just sort of does his nice bloke routine, doesn't he? He's like, yeah, he's talking about stopping knife crime. Can you imagine the Lib Dems stopping knife crime? Like, hey, come on, mate, put it down. It's not worth it. You know what I mean? I just imagine the patheticness of their attempt to stop knife crime. In fact, I made another point about that. I need to find this actually because I was just live tweeting the whole thing because apparently I've got no life at all. And I just said, imagine looking out at the collapsing dystopian hellscape shithole that is Britain 2024 and thinking the Lib Dems will fix this. And I'm sorry for the language, but imagine that. Oh, and also Davey said Lake Windermere, which is a bit of a problem for voters in my hometown because mere means lake. So, of course, it's a tautology to say Lake Windermere. You have to say things like on Windermere and it can be confusing because you've also got the town Windermere. So I told people the way to differentiate is how wet are you. I mean, if you're in the town Windermere, you probably are wet because it probably is raining, but you're probably not as cold and wet as if you were in the actual lake, and therefore that's a good way to know. But and then someone was arguing with me about what Windermere was and how much they seemed to claim it was just the area around the train station. I was like, you're telling me about Windermere, even though I spent 7 bitter years there at school and grew up there. My parents still live in the area. My grandparents both lived in the area. But anyway, sorry, that's a digression. But anyway, he said Lake. He said Lake Windermere. So that's another reason not to vote Davy. Although they do like Tim Farron up in Cumbria. But anyway, I'm
Well,
rambling
one
about
person
the
who is
question time. Go on.
one person who is kind of looking out at the dysfunctional hellscape that is contemporary Britain and thinking maybe the Lib Dems are the answer is Rory Stewart. Did you see that?
Yeah.
He told the Observer in an interview on Sunday that he said, "I guess my hand will float over Labour, but will probably come down on Lib Dems or the Greens."
Oh, the Greens. Yeah, I'd
The
like a sort of
Greens.
guy that screams "Allo Akbar" while occasionally worrying about Wales. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I know people knew
The
he
guy,
wasn't a Tory, but not even Lib
yeah.
Dem. People are like he's a Lib Dem. Like, oh no, hold your beer. I'm a Green.
I know that was a shock. I mean, yeah, it's one thing saying you're considering voting Lib Dem. I mean, that's quite bad. But to say that you might vote Green,
I know.
you
What an
wouldn't have thought that
oddball.
anyone remotely sensible would even consider voting Green. But
Yeah, he'll
yeah,
probably vote Labour. He just didn't want to say. I don't know. I don't want to besmirch him. He was always an
do,
odd
do,
sell,
do,
wasn't he? This weird kind of explorer figure, possibly a spy that looks kind of like a ventriloquist doll.
Florence of Arabia, I've heard him described as.
Right.
Um, but do you think we can now submit a complaint to Ofcom? You know, here's the proof that there's nothing balanced about putting the rest is politics as a sort of on Channel 4 news. That is a breach of the broadcasting code. That is two socialists discussing the general election campaign. It isn't a Tory and a socialist. That we can finally dispense with that illusion. Rory is every bit. If he's thinking of voting Green, he's every bit as left wing as Alistair Campbell. He
Yeah,
may
that's
even
a good
be
point.
to the left of Alistair Campbell. The idea that it's in any way a balanced podcast is now for the birds, I think.
Yeah, I think it was always completely absurd. They keep trying to get Farage
Yeah.
on, to be fair, though. Campbell's obsessed with getting Farage on, which he tries to do by calling him a wimp and insulting him. And it's like, yeah, that'll be good for Farage to come onto a podcast where he's absolutely hated and just be attacked by you for an hour. I mean, how's that going to help him in any way? But then again, maybe maybe it'll be good. He should come on. He definitely should have been on the BBC thing because it was so boring. They were all so similar. We needed Farage saying they all sound the same. And frankly, I don't believe a word. Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny that none of them mentioned immigration? But did you see, by the way, that campaign video that he put out? Vote for a voice in Parliament that will give a real opposition to Labour. And he's there with his dog
Yes.
in the countryside. It was so good. I
Yeah.
was saying it was in line with the bucolic greats of English history. Tolkien and E.M. Forster and D.H. Lawrence and Wind in the Willows, Clarkson. It had a very kind of people compare him to Toad of Toad Hall. It solidified his archetype as well. It kind of changed his archetype because he's got the kind of city boy archetype, and it's this metamorphosis to the country Farage. Just there on a park bench with his dog and some sort of windbreaker with just going. Nothing works. Nothing works in the country. I'm out here enjoying the beauty of England, but nothing worked. It was just so perfect. It was so good. Everything he's done on
Mm.
the campaign, every video and tweet has just been so good.
Yeah, well, that was, I think, the surprising thing about. I mean, maybe you're right, and this clip of him being interviewed by Nick Robinson talking about the Ukraine rather. Maybe maybe it's harsh to say that was a misstep. It was at the beginning of the campaign. He doesn't shy away from defending previous positions he's taken and so forth. But he did sort of double down on it afterwards. He gave this interview to ITV Tonight, which I think broadcast on Monday night before. Well, at the time of our recording this, it hasn't yet been broadcast, but he talks about it again and he says that actually we should be looking at some kind of peace treaty now and so forth. I mean, it's like he's still talking about it. Why is he still talking about it? I mean, as you say, everything apart from that has been note perfect, including that party political broadcast. He seems to have been kind of absolutely kind of capturing the zeitgeist in a way that none of the other political leaders are, and that's why Reform have been surging in the polls. And it was exciting, but now he feels he's really kind of, for the first time in the campaign, put a foot badly wrong, and it's disappointing given he up until this point seems such a fleet-footed operator.
There is that point. He didn't need to say it, given how well the campaign's going. But they're always going to get him on something. To me, it's more like they're ramping up the attacks. They were always going to find something. But yes, if you were really canny, you perhaps wouldn't have said it. But they'd have still dug it up from the past. But that's the Farage brand, though, is also just saying things and sticking with what you believe. So that's the counter. Trump said a lot of things on the campaign should have hurt him. Did they really hurt him with the core voter? I mean, would that stop you voting Reform, Toby? You said you might vote Reform. Would it stop you?
No, I don't think it would.
Certainly wouldn't stop me. So that's two already. It's amazing how many people are voting Reform. My barber the other day said he was voting Reform. Not particularly political. Wouldn't imagine him as some super right wing guy or something. I think a lot of normal people are going to vote Reform and switch. And do you know why he said, though? He said because they're the only people that care about small business. He's like, they're the only ones I've even heard talk about it. So, it's not just culture warriors who want to vote for them for, because of the memes. That's why I'm voting. But because of small business and things like that. That's quite interesting.
Do you think people are enthusiastic enough about Reform that they will actually, on the day, go to the polling booth and vote for them? I mean, one difficulty Reform faces, a handicap it has compared to Labour, Conservatives, even the Lib Dems, is they don't have much of a party machine. They don't have much in the way of ground troops that can go around and get out their vote. I mean, I'm not even sure they know where their voters are. I don't suppose their data is as good as the Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem data. So it could be that on the day, Reform don't poll nearly as well as they're polling in the opinion polls, because they just don't have the infrastructure, the party machine to get out their vote.
I think you're saying they won't do as well as projected.
Yes,
because I'm saying because they're not the infrastructure. I'm saying they will do better than projected because a lot of the voters may not be even answering polls, or they may be shy Reform voters, like we had shy Tories. And I think the groundswell is bigger than the polls, and the polls hasn't caught up yet. So my theory is the opposite, that it'll actually be bigger than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but
I guess it partly depends on how enthusiastic people who say they're going to vote Reform are about voting Reform. I mean, one of the reasons Leave won in the EU referendum is because people who wanted to get out of the EU were kind of more committed, more passionate, more determined to vote than Remainers, partly because Remainers all thought Remain was going to walk it, so there was less need for them to vote. I mean, and there's going to be a degree of that in this election too. I mean, I imagine it'll be quite a low turnout because everyone thinks, well, whatever I do is not going to make any difference. Labour are just guaranteed to win, and obviously Labour are terrified about that too, and so are playing down their lead in order to try and encourage people to come out and vote. But the result, I think, will be distorted by low turnout, and I think it will it'll probably penalise Labour and also penalise Reform, I think, and help the Tories. But that could just be my general Tory optimism, even though I'm voting for Reform.
Yeah, well, and you could win the prediction against me, but remember as well, my predictions in this are also propaganda. Like I'm just constantly saying Farage is inevitable, which to some degree is an observation, but to some degree it's me, speaking it into existence. So it is basically a propaganda machine for.
Presumably, have you placed a bet on the outcome of the election?
No, I wouldn't be as unethical as that. But I'm just, and I don't really gamble, but I just occasionally have on boxing and just always lose. But no, I haven't placed a bet. Even though I said Farage 2029 to be PM, I could put all sorts of bets on. But no, I'm just noting the meme magic and the Trump 2016 energy. But the question is always, what does that actually look like in our system with our weird system? It's not going to look anything like Trump 2016. If Farage could get an incredible number of votes, as we've said, but get 6 seats or no seats. Toby, I do want to talk about a couple of things with Rishi and Starmer, like this national service thing, but I also want to get our advert in so that it definitely gets into the.
Well, I was hoping I tried to shoehorn in betting then, but you didn't take the bait.
Oh, I didn't get it. No, I'm too tired. Sorry, I've been sitting up all night, very straight, and not sleeping. But can we do the advert first to make sure we get it in for Thor?
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's Thor.
Yes, it is the word. Good guess. Okay. I haven't actually had a chance to review this yet, so this is hot off the press. I've more confidence, peace, and personal fulfillment at 50 than I ever imagined possible as a young man. Would you like a guest speaker who brings a unique blend of transformative confidence coaching and humor to your podcast, event, or team? I was an early TEDx speaker, spoke on confidence in 2012, and have guested on well regarded and some renegade pods Zuby's Real Talk, The Current Thing, Conversations with an Investor, and The Delling Pod, for example. I've also had amazing guests on my show Toby Young, Peter Hitchens, Norman Lamont, Scott Adams, Tom Slade, Jeff Booth, Dapper Laughs, and plenty of ladies too. As a former trustee of a drug rehab and a multi decade coach, I've guided CEOs, managing directors, and heroin addicts, all with a combination of creativity, challenge, and brutal banter. I bring actionable insights on communication, personal spirituality, and thriving intimate relationships. Raised in St. Magnus Bay, did you know St. Magnus was a pacifist Viking? I've overcome health anxiety with plant medicine, advocate for drug policy reform, and role model truly sustainable, minimalist living. If you'd like to discuss how I might add value to your podcast, event, or team, WhatsApp me on +44 7906 321 593. That's +44 7906 321 593. Or you can reach me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Thorholt.
All right, thanks to Thor, and thanks Toby for trying to segue effortlessly to the betting scandal, which I miss because I am struggling today, and I know the listeners like to hear about how I'm tired and things, so I will talk about that more. But yeah, there was this betting scandal. Here's one in the Independent. Tories held in contempt by the electorate as pressure mounts on Rishi Sunak over betting scandal. So lots of people around Rishi, as I understand it, had a bit of a flutter on the election, which is kind of a bit concerning because around the Prime Minister might have known when it was. One of them was this guy, was it Craig Williams? Yes. He was Sunak's closest aide. Admits he made a huge error of judgment betting on the election date. I mean, you can imagine you're just there, you're in the trenches with Rishi, you're losing, it's humiliating, it's awful, and you just think, oh, you know, it'll be fun. Let's bet on when he's going to have the election. You don't think, oh, hang on, that's an obvious conflict of interest and obviously not going to go well at all. They should have seen that, but perhaps they were just so bored and miserable they just thought it'd be a bit of fun. What do you think?
It's not good, is it? You know, it's just you think this general election campaign, this Tory election campaign, could not be any worse. It's the worst campaign in living memory. I mean, I've just been shocked by how unbelievably poor it is. I remember us discussing, his announcement of the general election in the pouring rain outside Downing Street, getting completely drenched. And I think at the time we were discussing whether that was a kind of portent of things to come, or whether it was just a kind of an early misstep, which would soon be corrected. And I was just confident that the Tories would wage an effective campaign. And it would be better than Labour's campaign, and the polls would inevitably close. And the Gambling Commission aren't going to be investigating me anytime soon because I placed 2 bets on a hung bloody Parliament. But actually, this has been just a catastrophically poor, unbelievably inept election campaign that the Tories have fought. They now seem to have completely run out of money, amongst other things. They put out these begging letters saying Labour are getting all this money from the trade unions and from champagne socialists. Dip deep into your pockets and help us make a decent fist of campaigning in the last week of the campaign because we've completely run out of money. Apparently, Tories in seats with less than 10,000 majorities are being told, give up, you haven't got a hope, go and campaign in cabinet ministers' seats where they still have a chance. I mean, it's just, just when you thought it couldn't be any worse, they then get engulfed in this betting scandal. And according to, people carrying out focus groups, monitoring the campaign and how different messages are landing. This has really cut through. Most people have completely switched off. They're not interested, but this has cut through. They've noticed that some dodgy Tories have basically been insider trading using their specialist knowledge about the date of the election to win a few £100. I mean, it's just, if the Tories are completely wiped out, you think, oh, well, they thoroughly deserve it if they're going to be just so poor at waging a campaign as this. I mean, it shocked me. It really has.
The only thing that's worrying about it, you sort of think, yeah, Tories deserve to be destroyed. No offense to some of our Tory candidates possibly listening, but I also worry sometimes that this is a collapse of everything when no one can do anything, when nothing functions, even a Tory campaign and the Tories run out of money. Sometimes I worry about, even the collapse of the liberal global order, which I hate. I sometimes think it's still going to be pretty edgy when it collapses. It's always a bit disturbing that there's no adults in the room anywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like nothing works. Why? There's just idiocy all the way. You want there to be someone somewhere that says, no, of course you can't bet on the election, or you just want there to be competence and sanity somewhere, but there isn't.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think you do think in a country in which you often get the impression that nothing works, well, at least, the Tory election winning machine, that will surely still work. That's a well-oiled machine which has delivered 4 election victories, since 2010. And if anything works, you'd think that would still work. But you're right, it does seem to just be to add to the kind of general mood of kind of the collapse of civilization, the last days of Rome. Yeah, it's been just, I mean, the collapse of the Tory party campaign machine. It's just one more symptom of the kind of precipitous decline of Britain over the past sort of 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, and just the whole amateurishness of the Rishi campaign. But maybe the competence has gone to Starmer. I don't know if he is competent, but all the business leaders have gone to Starmer. Maybe that's where it's all gone, and Rishi is just done for. Poor old Rishi. I mean, there were some pictures of him at the Question Time. It wasn't really a debate, really. The weird leadership speech thing, looking just so sad inside. It was one of those "Hello, darkness, my old friend" sort of things. I felt bad. I said poor old Rishi, he had infinite money, so the only thing left was power. His instinctive ambition pushed him towards the top job, but he didn't seem to know why. He got there and it wasn't like he imagined, though he'll do fine, it will always haunt him in quiet moments. I mean, that was my takeaway. I just thought, I think that's correct. I just think, because why did he go for it? He's got infinite money, so it's not money, right? It's ambition, but he doesn't seem to. He does want to get on with the job, and he doesn't seem to like the requirements of politics. I mean, another thing I noticed about him is he always seems to be slightly exacerbated, like he's explaining, he's trying to get on with his work. This is how Sunak always seems to me. He was trying to get on with some important work. You interrupted him and made him explain it to some plebs. I mean, that's how he comes, and that is literally what you've done. To be fair, you've made him go to the Question Time studio and explain stuff. And he's like, no, but this is how it's going to work. And you sort of feel like he wants to just be in the back, crunching the numbers, getting on with it, rolling his sleeves up, and he's got, oh, I've got to explain it to these people again. He's like, I'm not good at that though. But unfortunately, that is most of politics, especially when you're the leader. It's virtually all of politics. Am I right?
I think, yeah. Why did he want to be the leader? Yeah, I mean, I think he believed that he would be a more competent leader than Liz Truss or Boris Johnson, and I think one of the things he thought that competence would manifest itself in was the ability to, deliver an election victory. And I think one of the reasons he does seem so, sad now during this campaign is because he's now going to go down in history as the Conservative leader who lost more seats than any other. And, on his watch, the Tory party was almost destroyed, and it could yet be destroyed. And that'll be his legacy. That's the last thing anyone would want as their legacy. Yeah, it's and you can sort of see this dawning realization that nothing he says or does now is going to be able to improve things. He's not going to be able to salvage anything from this campaign. It's going to be a catastrophe, and he's going to have to, soak up some of the blame, and partly for waging such an inept election campaign.
Yeah, and another example. Go on.
In the decision to call a snap election now, it looks like a kind of colossal error of judgment.
Yeah, it already looked a bit dodgy, and the other thing is the national service was just another bizarre one. I mean, you're already losing. You're already perceived as not caring about young people. You're like, I know, I'll come up with national service, but okay, it's got a vaguely patriotic hue to it. But then you go, tell you what, and if you don't do it, you get points on your driving license, or there'll be financial penalties. You're like, hang on. So one of the Question Time specialists said, well, you have a set of sanctions and incentives, and we will look at the models that are existing around Europe to get the appropriate mix of those. There's all sorts of things that people do across Europe, whether that's looking at driving licenses, other access to finance, all sorts of other things. And the spokesman has had to come out and say, well, no, he gave examples of things that happen in places like Latvia. It doesn't mean it's actually going to happen here. That's just what you could do. But I mean, imagine how unpopular that is. You're like, I tell you what, we'll go into your bank account. I mean, it also has got like COVID authoritarianism element. He's sort of very big on like, I helped you all during COVID. It's just very disturbing and weird, even for people. I mean, I don't mind national service in principle if if we had a conservative country with the death penalty and, got rid of no-fault divorce, and we had a more anti-abortion policies, and we had a national service, I'd be like, oh yeah, this is great. All right, that is the end of the free podcast for this week, but don't worry, there's still loads more podcasts. If you go to basedmedia.org and sign up for just £5 a month, that's the price of a pint in London or a posh coffee with loads of soy that you don't need. So basedmedia.org for the whole podcast, and you get Peak Woke, Base Department, all these great sections, and you help us keep going, pay all our staff, keep the lights on, keep this brilliant production going at basedmedia.org, and it's just £5. Thank you very much for the support, and we'll see you there.